Hey, everybody, welcome to the ATDev Podcast. We are joined today by Todd Roberts and Aaron Kubala, a really inspiring ultra athlete. Thanks for being here, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for the introduction, Owen.
Good to see you, Aaron.
It's good to see you, Todd, as always.
Awesome. So, yeah, Aaron, it would be really great just for our listeners if you could give a little bit of background about both your professional career in data science and what led you to your ultra marathons.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, as Owen mentioned, I'm an ultra marathoner and data scientist, and I'm living out in San Francisco, California. And my professional career has been in data science for the past 8 or 9 years now. But in the past 6 or 7 years, I got into the sport of ultra running, which is basically any distance that is more than a marathon. So, anything more than 26.2 miles. But I have pursued a side of it that is focused more on longer and longer distances of 200 miles, 300 miles. And that's a niche within the sport, at least for the past few years.
That's incredible. So, you say 200 miles. What does that look like?
That's a great question. It looks like
That's a
a
distance
lot
I
of
would,
suffering. No, it's
yeah, that's a distance I would think long and hard about before even driving, let
so
alone
yeah,
ride.
Yeah.
New York to Boston is about 200 miles, or Paris to London
Oh,
for
my
other
God.
context. And it is all done as one effort. You do need to sleep at some point, but pushing the sleep deprivation is how you push the boundaries of the sport. And for example, in Moab 240 in 2023, I was racing for 75 hours, but I slept for less than three of that. So you're
Wow.
not sleeping all that much.
That is unbelievable. I don't even think most people think that's possible.
I did not think it was possible until Aaron told me he was doing it, and then I thought he was messing with me, and then I looked it up, and yeah, it's incredible.
There's certainly some adrenaline effects that you feel during the race that like the excitement of being in that event allows you to push the sleep deprivation, but truly that's one of the probably the least enjoyable part of it.
Oof. I mean, yeah. At a certain point do you crave sleep more than to stop running? Like
Yeah,
your mind is more tired than your legs.
100%. And people often say about the sport that it ends up being like a more mental than a physical endeavor. And it certainly is very physical and premised in the physical. But for these multi-day events, it becomes your mind wants to stop before your body does. But a lot of that's a testament to, I think our bodies are much more capable of what a lot of people give them credit for. And so there's not really like a plausible upper limit to how far someone could run, so long as you're taking in nutrition, getting sleep in the right context. As long as you keep things like a certain zone threshold, then you can just keep going indefinitely almost.
Wow.
That is unbelievable. Can you walk us through your preparation and your training for one of these races?
Yeah, 100%. I think the preparation, the training are 90% of what goes into being successful in the sport, and that's also what no one really sees. And I think it's becoming more and more recognized that to do this sport, you have to be putting in immense hours in strengthening and pliability and stretching and all of the little kind of unglorious things that allow for the big event to happen. And so for me, what that looks like is in addition to getting like a certain amount of miles each week and conventionally running, it's adding strength workout, it's adding resistance workouts, it's doing a lot of little single leg activities to isolate different muscle groups to make sure that as you stretch the distance, usually past like a marathon, the muscle imbalances start to come out a bit more because there's always going to be a failure point. And so if one part of the body is less strong than the other, it can cause problems. So that's where like the single leg training really comes in, and it's a huge amount of help.
That is so interesting.
Wow. What what was the spark where you said, I want to do this? I want to become an ultra marathoner. Did you see somebody doing it on social media and you thought that was really cool, or you were looking for the highest amount of pain you could find? What was the reason that you initially thought to jump into ultra running?
No, I don't think I would do it if it were painful the whole time. There's a lot of joy in it, but that's a great question. In 2018, I ran the Boston Marathon, which was my first like marathon event, and
That's right.
it was
Yeah.
enjoyable. I met Todd at Northeastern, so we were both at Northeastern at the time. It was
Yeah.
my senior year, and I was traveling around after graduation as a graduation trip, and I was in Thailand. And I've always liked like pushing myself. And there's this island in Thailand called Koh Samui, and I just decided that one day I would try to circumnavigate the outskirts of it. And it was like 45 miles, and I walked most of it. Like it wasn't supposed to be this crazy physical accomplishment. But I was talking to a friend about it, and he goes, "You just ran an ultra." And I was like, "Oh, what's an ultra?" And then that started opened up the whole can of worms. And there's like a bunch of classic books in the space. And you talk about Born to Run is a big one. So I started researching what's out there, and it's, oh my God, there's this whole world of people that are pushing themselves in this way. And that inspired me. And then basically since then, I decided to get into it. And you do a 50K, which is 31 miles, 50 miler, 100K, 100 miler. And then in some cases, you go to 200. And yeah,
Oh my god.
where we are right now.
I know. I'm getting tired just listening to it. I mean, it's incredible. I had never heard the original story though. And you also didn't you at one point when we were all indoors for COVID, you ran a full marathon up and down stairs.
No, that's so yes and no. That's two separate stories. I was
Okay.
doing some data science research in Bangladesh,
Yeah.
and during COVID, we got quarantined, and I was not allowed to leave my apartment at all for a month, and so I was going crazy. So I did a marathon on a treadmill, which was like this
That's
decrepit.
right.
That was actually so psychologically boring. But what I'm more known for from that time was I climbed the height of Mount Everest on my Bangladeshi staircase, which like the lights weren't working, and it was like a 7-story building, and I was just going up and down for 27 hours straight. That's when my friends checked. I was posting it to Instagram, and
Yes, I
they're like,
remember that was happening live
"Cry
and
for
everybody was
help." And
cheering
I was
you on.
like,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's incredible. What was the data science research you were doing?
it's a company called Innovations for Poverty Action, and we are running what are called like RCTs, randomized control trials, in the garment sector in Bangladesh, trying to improve like worker outcomes and well being.
Wow. And what was sort of the ultimate outcome of that research for at least the time that you were there?
Oh,
What was
COVID and just no,
yes.
so we did have to pivot the research project. So my research project that I was working on mainly was in nutrition, and then you
Yeah,
have something like a global pandemic that throws a massive wrench in all of your data. So we were able to
sure.
salvage some of the
Right.
research to have like preliminary findings, but we didn't have as much data as we would have liked. And then what my job ended up being was pivoting to COVID research at the time and how it was affecting the garment workers,
Uh,
the Bangladeshi economy, and so I had to do a hard pivot, as many of us did career
yeah,
wise during what 2020.
yeah, absolutely. Wow.
I, if I'm remembering my history correctly, the first marathon was run by someone in ancient Greece. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, it was from Marathon to Athens, and he was a messenger that was supposed to tell of the results of the war. And the story, which maybe is apocryphal, maybe not, is that he ran the marathon, gave the message, and then just dropped dead. Which is
That's
pretty
what I heard too.
well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Clearly, you can run farther than that and
Yeah,
not drop
clearly
dead.
he
As you,
didn't do his strength and mobility training. I think that's
yes.
the real lesson is he wasn't doing his single leg squats.
I think my question is, how do you go about doing it safely with nutrition and not dying?
That's another great question because there's not a high rate of death in the sport. Like in terms of extreme sports, it certainly is extreme, but it's nothing like skydiving or hang gliding or anything like that. But to that point, like a lot of what makes people successful in this is the logistics planning that goes into the race. And so being able to like take a certain amount of calories per hour, as fueling is a huge part of this. Like if you're not fueling, you're going to run out of energy and bonk. And your hydration, of course, and planning in the route like where you have access to water, right? And so managing your water, your hydration or your nutrition, like the charges on your devices, your electrolytes, that's all a big component of not dying. um,
Yeah.
and in the races as well, there are safety measures. Like there's a medical team at hand. Everyone has a track, like a GPS tracker on them. Theoretically, if you are in trouble, you can get airlifted or rushed out of there. Yeah, no, it's
What are some of your key data metrics that you measure on yourself during the race?
That's I love this question too, because especially my background as a data science, like being able to use my interest and background in data science to become a better runner has been a really interesting angle. And I think in today's day and age with smartwatches and our iPhone at hand. Like there's just so much data we have on ourselves. And so to your question, I think in the weeks leading up to a race, I really want to focus on getting good sleep, especially if sleep deprivation is a part of it. And going to bed early, like having less alcohol, which tends to affect sleep even in small amounts. And you can front load the sleep a week or two leading up to the race. So I'll really pay attention to that. But in the
Really,
race, the biggest metric, sorry, go ahead.
you can bank the sleep, sort of.
Yes, I don't know if it's been scientifically proven, but from an anecdotal or, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
I feel I will certainly feel better if I've gotten 10 hours of sleep for 5 days before the race.
Well, people always talk about it. You pulled an all-nighter, and then you have to spend. It's going to take you multiple nights to recoup that lost sleep. So, kind of on the other side, it carrying over, not being just a total reset overnight.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
makes total sense.
But I think the biggest metric in a race is heart rate, and especially in terms of there are ideas in specifically like 200-mile ultra running that you really want to be in that zone two the entire time, so not taxing your body's system. And so understanding like your own zone thresholds and where your body is like taking or building up lactic acid versus not is if you can ride a zone at the highest pace you can do without dipping into the next one, that's like the energy efficient spot to be in. And so understanding your own heart rate data from months or years of training, and then on race day, like I'll usually change my watch to only have distance and heart rate, and if I exceed a certain
Mm.
threshold I'll pull back. So your pace is dictated at least in the front half of the race by keeping your heart rate low, and then back half of the race it's like anything goes, whatever energy left in the tank. But that's like the biggest metric for determining pace responsibly, I would say.
Yeah.
That is so interesting. So going back to logistics, I know you just did a race in Atacama, Peru. Is that right?
In Chile, yeah.
Chile, excuse me, which I believe is one of the driest areas on Earth.
Yes, yeah. The tagline of the race was it's in the highest, driest desert on Earth, and so it was at like the race average was like 12,500 feet. So you're super high in the mountains. And if we're gonna be technical, like the driest desert on Earth is in Antarctica, but it sounds less cool to be like this the highest non-Arctic desert or like second highest. And so people just say the highest, driest desert on Earth.
Maybe you can do Antarctica next.
Honestly, I would love that. People are doing. I think this year just did the first. It was like a world record attempt for Antarctic 100-miler.
That's amazing.
There's some precedent there, yeah. But yeah, so
What?
this race was in November, and it was from essentially one side of Chile, starting near Iquique, which is on the west coast, across the Atacama Desert, going east to the Bolivian border, down to this town called San Pedro de Atacama. And it was, I think, the final mileage total was about 304, 305. So that was the hardest, longest event I've done to date.
What was your time?
94 hours, so just under
Oh my God!
just under 4 days.
Wow. 300 miles in 4 days
Yeah, and
On
then
foot.
on foot. That and you had a team with you, right? Like you had a van that had supplies and stuff. Yeah,
yeah, that's to answer. Go back to one of Owen's previous questions. Like that's
yeah,
how you don't die, is you have people that are supporting you. And
yeah.
so in this case, I had 6 friends with me in a couple of Chilean mining trucks, which are these like souped up 4x4 Toyota Hiluxes, and you're just cruising. You don't really see a town for 250 miles, and so we're all self-sufficient in the cars. We have camping supplies. We're cooking out of like a stovetop
Oh,
and a
that's
burner. And
incredible.
yeah, there's thank goodness there was a guy in the crew that was like really good with flat tires because we're we're just getting flats everywhere.
Wow.
And going to the mental aspect, do you listen to music while you're running, or is it more of a meditative experience?
I like to do both, and I don't think it's necessarily mutually exclusive, but I'll have moments that, or go for a few hours, no music, and just, I always call it like I go a cappella. That's when you can really get into yourself and be meditative. I definitely use music as a tool, and it feels very reflective even to have the 6-person crew. They were all pacing me, where you basically run sections of the race next to me. And so it's a lot of conversation. And with the mental aspect, I mean, one of the key things in a 4-day race is not getting really bored, right? And so just
Right.
keeping things interesting and talking to friends and asking interesting questions, like that bonding experience is I think one of the most enjoyable parts of this sport.
Is it a spiritual experience? I can imagine being that exhausted, and I mean, it has to alter your consciousness in some way.
It certainly can be, and for me, just from my own personal experience, it absolutely is, and especially this race. I'd never been to a fourth day in a race before, and just it necessitated such a deeper level of dig that the last, I don't know, maybe the last 8 hours of this run, it felt like I was in a different, like, plane of existence, and what's so interesting to me is all of our life is bound by time, and it's measured in time, and in this four-day experience, your only goal is to get from point A to point B and to move forward. You disassociate from time. So it feels like this rare chance to exist outside of how we live day and day. Like my metric of things passing was via distance. And to shift from living in a time-based world to a distance-based world is you get outside of yourself a bit. By day 4, I didn't know what day it was. I didn't know if it was day 3, day 5. Like I'm not paying attention. I'm not on my phone. And so that's certainly a spiritual thing, is just to exist in a different world. At least that's counter to what your normal living is.
That's really interesting.
Wow. I mean,
So, oh, go ahead, Todd.
how long does it take you to switch back? Like what is the recovery like? What is the first step I gotta imagine is, I mean, when you're done, do you just fall over, or do you need to kind of keep moving some?
A little bit of both. There's
Yeah,
always such a big release when you finish, and there's usually like a bit of an adrenaline component too.
yeah.
And your body and your mind are both just so confused. And so it can be a bit anticlimactic to finish. And certainly there's joy and there's a release. It probably took me about an hour to fall asleep after this race. And I was in to answer the recovery question. I think you have to bifurcate that into there's the physical recovery and the mental recovery.
Yeah.
And the physical recovery, the body's pliable, the body can bounce back. It's probably a few days before I could jog again, but to be fully back physically, at least a week or two. But the mental side takes a bit longer, and especially that kind of sleep deprivation is you're just you're usually about 80 to 90% of what you normally feel like, but you're just not quite there for, I would say, for a 300-mile race, about 3 to 4 weeks.
I mean, is it like an extended fog, like kind of like a hangover almost, or
Yeah, there is there's
yeah,
a bit of brain fog for sure. There's
yeah,
actually a study that came out last year about demyelination in marathon running, where and this is just marathons. The body in these extreme endurance events can use its own myelin sheaths, like what coats the brain neurons, where it's like a lipid-based source, and will use them as a fuel. And so
eating your myelin sheaths
yes,
because
which
your yeah.
it sounds concerning,
Yeah.
and so it's like I'm really dumb by writing. No, but the conclusion of this was that they actually regenerate faster and in a way that was different than initially anticipated. And so there's some interesting
Wow.
implications for Alzheimer's and dementia, and
Oh
just
my
because
goodness.
there's some stuff we don't understand there. But I imagine that's probably part of why in a 4-day race there is a brain fog after, and also just the
Yeah.
sleep deprivation. It's not, there's hormonal changes, but the
Yeah.
sport is so new that there's so much we don't understand about the implications of what's going on, especially as someone that has like an interest in data. I'm so fascinated to figure out in the next 5, 10, 20 years more about what's actually going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any universities that are like looking into that, or is there any like ongoing research that you're aware of?
Not so on the physical side, yes. There's a lab at Stanford right now that's been doing some physiological research and looking at VO2 max and blood work. But on the cognitive side, there's nothing that I'm aware of. I actually have this thought that is very similar to the John Hopkins studies on psilocybin, and that the effect on the mind is very similar to, like, people describe it as a religious or psychedelic experience in a 200 or 300-mile event. And I do wonder if there's a very similar neurochemical effect where you're cross wiring in a way that might actually simulate psychedelics, and that is not being studied as far as I'm aware.
Yeah,
I
I'm
mean,
sure there is.
there's the runner's high, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
classic description. Yeah. 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 So you just got a chance to try the latest Reflex system and understand its capabilities, cross stretching and strengthening, etc. How you know how do you see that fitting into this ultra marathon space and this extreme athleticism?
So I've tried a few iterations of the Reflex over the past year and a half, and I got really excited today putting on this new version, especially because I know it really has like such potential as a recovery tool, and even for me, like in my racing, after a race would love to have an assisted device that helps me with my PT, makes it easy, makes it structured, and I can have metrics on my strength over time. So what I'm envisioning in the recovery aspect, which would be amazing, is after a race, like I know what my previous strength was in terms of resistance, and I can
Yeah.
check every day what like my quad strength is looking like with the reflex, and maybe even choose when I get back to this level of strength, then I can start running again in a healthy manner. I think
Yep.
there's such potential there to have that data available. But what got me even more excited today was how good the resistance was. And resistance training is such a key component of a healthy body, really. And the fact that it was genuinely at full strength, like a workout for me to do my quad extensions and hamstring pulls. And I would love to be using that as much as possible, like in training, especially sitting on a couch, chilling in the quieter periods, have this ability to just to grind out a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. And so what does 2025 hold for Aaron Kubala?
2025 is my big 200-mile racing year. And so there is something called the Triple Crown of 200s in the ultra running world. And it's by the race organization Destination Trails. And it's three 200 plus mile races: Tahoe 200 in June, which goes around the Rim Trail; Bigfoot 200 in August, which goes around Mount St. Helens and rural Washington. And then I'm returning to Moab 240 in October, which will be 240 miles through the Moab Desert. And I'm really trying to push the boundaries of the time goals and the pace, and hoping to set some course records this year. And this year is a big 200-mile push.
That's
And,
incredible. Well,
oh, go ahead, Todd.
well, I was just going to say we're really excited to hopefully support being able to go back to back to back like that across three massive races on a short time span and get back to full race readiness, 2 months after the last one. Hopefully Reflex can be a part of that.
Oh, absolutely. I would love that as well. You guys have already been a part of this journey. It's been great to have be able to work with you guys. And I'm truly so excited, not just for me and my own uses, but I think there's so much potential that's like already there with Reflex to be integrated into this athletic space, and especially a space that is in a sport that the success is so much in the little workouts and little strength training, and having a device that is geared toward that and makes it easier, I think could be massive.
Awesome. And how can people reach out to you and follow you?
Great question. I think I'm most active on Instagram, and that's just at my name. So Aaron, Aaron, Kubala, Kubala. But there's also all the results of these races are posted publicly, and looking up any 200-mile race, hopefully my name's up on the podium for those in this coming year.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here today, Aaron. And we will be closely watching you and wishing you a happy, healthy ultra marathon season.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate the support, and I will likewise be following ATDev as it continues to just get better and better.
Awesome. Good to see you as always, Aaron.
Likewise.